Hi, I'm Sarah Cowgill, your host for this live coverage of the Republican National Convention, a special edition of the Conservative Five, brought to you by Liberty Nation News. Joining me today are some of the best political minds in the business: Tim Donner, John Clark, Dave Patterson, and Graham Noble. We're going to discuss the highs and lows of the biggest GOP party Milwaukee has seen in a long time. We have the official ticket set. Tim, let's get started on the good, the bad, and the weird coming out of the convention.
Well, I do think it was the biggest party uh, in Milwaukee since Happy Days went off the air many years ago, which the show that made Milwaukee famous. But this will be the one that everyone remembers because, and it isn't just the love fest that Donald Trump was engaging in for 4 days. It's the fact that it happened right after he was shot in the head, while the other party is crumbling at an equally rapid rate as the Republicans are uniting. So, I mean, the whole thing was almost surreal when you looked at it and you saw what happened 2 days before the convention started and the readily available necessary prop of the bandage on the ear, which inspired other delegates to the convention to go ahead and get their own. And I suspect that's going to be a symbol for the rest of this campaign. I think the biggest problem that the Republican Party and Trump has right now is to figure out who it is they're actually going to face on November 5th. Because the only reason I'm confident in saying right now that Joe Biden is hanging on for dear life is because we're going live. It could be an hour after we end this discussion. He could be out. He could be out Sunday. He's got the whole world against him, it seems, except his wife and his son, apparently, as he sits, as someone said, in exile in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware. I mean, the contrast between this triumphant convention for Trump and the crumbling of Joe Biden and perhaps the broader Democratic Party is it's the most dramatic, melodramatic, striking contrast I've ever seen in the 60 years I've been following politics.
I thought Trump's speech, it was surprising to me. It was very toned down. Graham, you and I had kind of an offline discussion about this. It wasn't the normal energy, I don't think, that Trump usually, just comes across with. It seemed just kind of down. The whole convention was hopeful, but and maybe I'm wrong, Graham. Help me out here. I'm stumbling a little bit.
Well, I would say, my theory on this, Sarah, is that it's not that Trump was actually kind of like low energy or anything. I think it was because he was sort of almost out of his comfort zone in terms of giving a speech. I mean, normally when he does speeches at rallies, he's very quite often, and I'll be perfectly honest with you here, I usually don't like watching his rallies because I have to because I'm a political correspondent, but I prefer not to because generally it's a lot of his speeches tend to be they're about him. He often airs a laundry list of grievances. And also he's very much kind of unfiltered. He'll go on. He can be quite entertaining at times, and he's very good at speaking off the cuff. But sometimes he'll go off on a tangent. But often
sometimes.
Oh well, okay, yeah, all right. But he's but and I think this speech, I think he made a deliberate attempt to deliver a different type of speech, and I think that's why he seemed kind of subdued, because I think he was struggling against his own nature. in order to not make this speech about him, not make this speech about his grievances about 2020 or the lawfare against him, and the way the press has treated him ever since he announced he was running in 2016. He was trying to make this about optimism of the future. I mean, he didn't even spend an enormous amount of time, if you consider the length of the speech. He didn't spend an enormous amount of time criticizing the current administration. He certainly brought them up, obviously, in regards to, illegal immigration and stuff like that, and crime and all the rest of it. But he didn't, it wasn't a speech bashing all of his critics. This was a speech about, this is what we're going to do. It was a uniting speech. We've got to come together. We've got to make this a better country. We can do it. It was more a forward-looking speech, and it wasn't about him. So that's it, really. I just think that's why he came across as a little subdued, is because he was delivering the kind of speech that he normally doesn't deliver.
Well, and when he walked over to Comprador's fire jacket and helmet that they placed on stage, that brought tears to my eyes. I mean, I wasn't expecting it and wasn't expecting him to do what he did. Trump is bombastic, and he was very controlled over that. Dave, give me an out here.
Well, I think that there is another way of looking at Trump last night, and that what you saw was what everyone who seems to know him sees on a daily basis, and the exception is when he's before the public in the rallies. And if that was not the case, it certainly was the narrative that was pushed throughout the Tuesday through Thursday, and I think very effectively. When Hulk Hogan and and the others who identify very closely with the folks, as Bill O'Reilly would say, I think that was another effort to show the humanity of Donald Trump and what he is off camera. And I think that was extraordinarily effective. I personally didn't understand the words to Kid Rock's classical oratorio, but I'm sure others did.
I, for one, love Kid Rock, just
Yeah.
FYI.
I was reminded of an instance where a person arrived at a NASCAR race and the entire audience rose in cheering to Donald Rumsfeld. And that was very similar to what you saw last night.
Well,
Well, Clark,
I think the whole convention, and I'm not sure the extent to which this was true before Trump was shot, was designed to humanize Donald Trump. Now, I think with what happened, it turned from an element of the convention into the theme of the convention. Yeah. I mean, the granddaughter was an absolute rock star when she got up there and said that Donald Trump, like most grandparents, gives them treats and candy when the parents aren't looking. I thought the best line, though, was when she said, because she's evidently a scratch golfer herself, that she's in quite a competition with her grandfather on the golf course, and that when they face each other, I love when she said, he tries to get into my head. and then she said, he seems to forget that I'm a Trump too. So
that was excellent.
I think it just that, and also the scene of Donald Trump just sort of spontaneously, although I'm sure the left will say it was all staged, just like they're saying that he posed for that shot, that it was a photo op after he got shot.
Yeah, because everybody would put their life on the line for us.
But I mean, when he picked up his granddaughter and just put her on his lap and started kind of rocking her the way a grandfather would, I think people saw a different side of Donald Trump that was not possible for them to see without the entire sequence of events that concluded with him being shot in the head.
Well, John Clark, the all of the big box media are kind of downplaying Trump's speech and downplaying the convention and saying that Trump's speech was the best thing that happened to Democrats all week. I don't get that. I don't understand where all that's coming from. I don't think they watched the same show we watched, maybe.
Well, fortunately, the American people are watching. And what I see here is an election of contrast, not just between the people, but the policies, the parties, the visions for the country, actually a contrast or a competition between Marxism and capitalism. In fact, looking at what's going on right now in the country, I've been a little concerned that what appears to have been a deliberate sabotage of our monetary system to spike inflation is itself fuel to get people to clamor for a Marxism where their grocery bills will never go up. And Donald Trump, in all of his themes, represents the rescue of a free market capitalism with integrity from a bureaucratic technocracy that is dismantling the American dream. Now, all of these contrasts, we see a visible contrast in their mental competence, in their messaging, but also a contrast of two Trumps. I think in the last two elections, it worked for Trump to be inflammatory. He got press everywhere. The Democrats hated it. He got press everywhere while they continued to try to paint a positive message as a negative thing. And that message is now breaking out. A contrast between the old and new Trump is that we have a mature Trump now. He doesn't have to be. In fact, staying in lane, staying on message is not only delightful for many of his supporters who almost universally complained that they wished he didn't tweet, but he undermines the left's or the media's ability to criticize him legitimately. And that's why we see the media pivoting and saying things that are absolutely ridiculous. When you can't find an actual problem, then you concoct one. Like, I mean, J.D. Vance's wife is just horrible, having clerked, after the Yale, being an immigrant. They can't put, they've been putting lipstick on a pig on one candidate. Again, that mental contrast and that idea of a message. Again, let's contrast with Obama. This is change that Americans are being asked to really believe in, which is a reaffirmation of everything we are. This is a joyful, patriotic truth in contrast to 30 years of falsehood, is the way I think, personally, when I look at it and I see it. And, Biden came in saying he was going to be the uniter. And he has spent the intervening 4 years dividing, pandering to his base while demonizing conservatives. Donald Trump said, I am running to be president for all of America, not half of America, because there is no victory in winning for half of America. And as I'll come back to in the last 24 hours, there have been 3 or 4 major news media outlets on the left who are trying to dismantle this speech, and to me are just plunging ahead further in their failed gaslighting, because Americans can see that the border is a crisis. They can see that inflation is a problem. So no matter how much you try to doctor it up with your co-opted statistics, Americans are seeing it. I think this is a very pivotal time with 2 visions for America. And it's not just about 2 people. It's about the very foundations of our nation and what will help it survive and grow.
But let's remember here when we're talking about inflation, let's remember that when Joe Biden came into office, inflation was at 9%.
Yeah,
that's what he told us.
He has done just a marvelous job bringing it down to 3%.
Why don't we fact check him more often?
Yeah, I mean, you know what? You could. It's amazing. I mean, that Trump is positioned universally as this legendary liar. Okay, his lies are like this huge rally in New Jersey had hundreds of thousands of people when it was really tens of thousands. He had the biggest inauguration in history. It probably wasn't. Okay, Joe Biden's lies are inflation was at 9% when it came to office. Compare and contrast the magnitude of those untruths, okay? And you could forgive Joe Biden for saying it once that inflation was 9% because, okay, we all know that his cognitive state is compromised, to say the least. So, okay, you might say it once, but he's repeated it over and over again. He repeated it in 2 separate interviews this week. And the fact that he's so out of touch with reality, or living in the fantasy world of where he saved the country from inflation rather than created it through his policies, I think is the same mindset that has him sitting in virtual exile right now in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware, with an ever-tightening circle of advisors, akin to the end of the last days of Richard Nixon, where everybody had abandoned him. His own party was abandoning him, and he was alone and sick and weak. And it is something to behold just for the history books. People will look back on this campaign, that debate, this assassination attempt, this, revolt within the Democratic Party in the history books 100 years from now. That's how this sequence of events, I hate to use the word unprecedented, because we're instructed by the editor-in-chief never to use unprecedented unless it's really true. But I would defy anyone to say there's any precedent for
and I think the
what's
contrast
happening in this campaign.
Tim's right. The contrast is between truth and falsehood. And there are people that believe things about Donald Trump that are absolutely, alien to the world of reality, and they believe it. And so that's why we see, kind of like J.D. Vance, watch them try to attack him. I just don't see any dirt on the guy, And when they go after Donald Trump for the speech, I see this in the headlines. Let me share a couple with you and show you why I think Americans are going to look back past the falsehoods, which are not from Donald Trump. They're not just from our sitting president. They're from the media. Here's USA Today said about the speech. This is just in the last few hours. Trump also said Democrats should stop, quote, weaponizing the justice system, though there is no evidence that Democratic officials have affected the criminal charges the former president is facing. Well, guess what? I get asked all the time as a lawyer. The American people can see past the gaslighting of USA Today. They saw what happened to Donald Trump. They understand what lawfare is. They still don't understand what exactly he was convicted of, and that's just been flushed down the toilet. So the press is still trying to push that. The Daily Mail criticized him for breaking the one promise he gave before the convention. Do you know what that was? That he wouldn't mention Joe Biden's name, and he did it twice. What an insult. Maybe he should have asked for a bullseye or, said he was the enemy of America. The double standard of the press that used to pretend to be journalists and now are just open propaganda tools for the let's hate Trump. One issue, you must vote for us because Trump's evil. It's collapsing with this convention.
They are desperate beyond all measure when they consider that, when Donald Trump marched into Washington in 2017, he had exactly one small handful of real allies on Capitol Hill. He didn't know the landscape. He'd never played the game before. And he told, I think of what is something he told Rush Limbaugh a few weeks after he was elected, but before he took office, he said, I think people will get over this and the country will unite behind me. And Rush Limbaugh looked at him and he said, Mr. President-elect, you don't understand. Those people are never going to unite behind you. Now they're facing a guy who, instead of walking into Washington basically with 2 strikes against him and a pitch on the way down the middle, he's come in and he knows, to use a hackneyed expression, he knows where all the bodies are buried. He knows, he knows who he can trust, who he can't trust. And most of all, what they fear is a Donald Trump liberated from the need to seek re-election, because they know then he can set loose on his reforms.
I want to bump in here because I know I see that the conservatives and the GOP, I see them rally around Donald Trump. What I don't see is the independents or maybe some wobbly Democrats wanting to jump ship yet. I don't see that because they don't watch what conservatives watch. They don't read what conservatives read.
If you
They
look
are
at the
not
polls, though, Sarah,
watching that convention.
the polls are starting to reflect even before the convention. The
I think
most
that
latest
has,
poll from
yeah.
CBS had Trump ahead by 5 points nationally. I think most people think that's about where the race is.
Tim, I think that one of the reasons that this is happening is because when you analyze the Trump speech, you find that there are optics that you cannot deny. The granddaughter. But the most clear and obvious optic was when he put that chart up on the Jumbotron. You will never forget that chart where it shows his administration stopping in the invasion of illegal aliens and the Biden administration allowing it astronomically.
Right.
That difference in those bars told a huge story. And I think that was just genius.
And that impacts those independents, Sarah. And
Yeah,
whether
but what
they
are they
watch
even watching? You got to get them to watch it first.
Well, so this goes back to what I'm saying about the big ideas, and I think Tim's really on it as far as truth versus falsehood. They're tired of being lied to. Black people are tired of being told they're going to be rescued from their poverty by a president who forgets them the moment he gets in office and doles out $1 trillion to his, donor renewables. That's all collapsing. And by the way, Trump hit on that when he attacked EV cars in the U.S. car fleet. He was really talking also about government overreach. He was talking about a destroyed economy that could be resurrected. All of these things that I think resonate for Americans. So now let's say you're not watching it and you're an independent, and the next day you pick up the news and you see ABC News and it says this in their fact check of the speech you didn't watch. It says, there is no evidence of a major surge in crime caused by recent arrivals, and Trump's claims ignore the fact that crime is down across the country. U.S. citizens also commit crimes at higher rates than undocumented immigrants. The liberal media is trumping for policies that have failed. And the last thing they want is Americans to look at the actual policies, because their only real policy is let's hate conservatives and Christians. They don't have any actual meat behind it. And independents, I think, are very in tune with that, whether or not, of course, they're probably not watching the convention, but they watch the highlights. And the worst thing they can say about him is, oh my gosh, he's evil. He said he wouldn't say Biden's name, and he did. The man is performing very well and better in contrast to his past efforts. So I think the independents are very much on the issues of immigration and inflation and, and also maybe war. And all three of those, guess who looks better in 2024?
Let's remember something else, too.
Independent that I have talked to of late that wants to vote for Donald Trump. And I know I'm in a small little bubble, but they don't want Biden, but they're very seriously considering RFK Jr.
Yeah, well, they're in a growing minority because RFK's campaign has all but collapsed. I mean, when's the last time you heard anything about him?
But I think
nobody's going to talk about him. They haven't talked about him since the get-go.
I think too that one of the things that comes across in fact in all of the presentations was that for the most part toward the end they started, with the exception of the two Biden comments. But incidentally, just as an aside, Trump never said he wasn't going to mention Biden. Everyone else did. And so I don't hold him.
That's true.
I don't hold him to a standard that everyone.
It's still a nothing burger. Yeah, it doesn't. It's ridiculous.
But nonetheless, I think that what you saw was more and more of the Republican Party focusing on the Democrats, not Biden, the Democrat administration. They'll take on Kamala Harris because she still has her fingernails into the Democrat community. But the focus from now on is going to be on Democrat policies that have failed. They have failed for as long as there have been Democrats.
Well, yes. And of course, that's also the wise thing politically, because they really aren't sure who they're going to.
No, that's right.
And, there's talk about Gretchen Whitmer being parachuted in from Michigan and she could win the battleground states because she's from Michigan and she's young and dynamic. And people don't realize how unbelievably complex it would be to dump a sitting president with 3.5 weeks to go before the convention when he's sitting alone defiant, and every single Democratic primary voter, absent about maybe 3%, voted for him. He played the rules exactly the way they set them up, and he won fair and square. He owns all the ballots. He owns all the delegates. And it's strictly up to him. And you can see his position. You can see his position that, okay, so let's review this. In 2020, you put me on the ticket because you thought I could beat Trump. I beat Trump. And then we dodged the red wave in 2022 midterms. And now you're telling me you want me to step aside for who? For her? For Kamala Harris? Seriously? I could envision, I could definitely envision a conversation like that having taken place. So he is, we hear these reports that, the most intense report that I've heard is that Barack Obama, who is the senior party elder, I guess, said he should seriously consider withdrawing. Well, they've been saying that ever since the debate, and he hasn't budged an inch.
I think the Democrats made a fatal error actually in 2020, or perhaps Joe Biden himself made a fatal error, politically a fatal error, when he selected Kamala Harris to be his VP. It was obviously, we all know it was a diversity pick. She's a woman of color, and so therefore they picked her. But Kamala Harris has never been popular, even among Democrats. And she's certainly not popular among black people. And Kamala Harris herself is not black, maybe a little bit. Her father was Jamaican, but she's not really what you would class as African American. But she spent a lot of time in California, locking up young black men as quickly as she could, and they haven't forgotten that. But anyway, the thing is, they should have looked to the future. Democrats, even in 2016, they should have looked at, Joe Biden's potential window of time that he had as that he was going to have as chief executive. And, somebody should have advised him, you need to pick someone as a VP who everyone has complete confidence in, could actually step in if necessary, if and when the time.
Well, they weren't playing long
take
ball.
Over from you.
Actually, they were playing short ball.
Yeah,
that's
the
problem. They were playing
just
short
wanted to
ball.
win it.
They would do anything to knock Trump out in 2020. They couldn't afford, in their minds, to think ahead to 2024. Yeah. And Biden locked the whole party in by saying, yes, I promise to take a woman. And then, yes, I promise to take a woman of color. After the George Floyd riots, he locked himself, painted himself into a corner to essentially create a VP short list of one person. And now the chickens are coming home to roost because she's thoroughly unelectable. I see the polls saying that she could do better than Biden. She could energize the party. She's a train wreck. She never even made it to the starting line.
Okay, here's what we know about the Democrats
in 2020. She never even made it to the starting line of the first contest in 2020 after much ballyhooing and calling Biden a racist on the debate stage and getting publicity that way. And she face planted. And I think the Democrats need to remember how incredibly inept a candidate she was back then. And I don't think anybody thinks she's been magically transformed into a future president.
Here's what we know about the Democratic Party, though. The Democratic Party, they would pull Bigfoot out of the woods and sell him. And every Democrat would go, yeah, let's go with Bigfoot. They're just followers. They're going to follow. They're not going to question. Dave,
Look
sorry, I
at
didn't
look
jump
at
all over it.
Bigfoot's achievements. He's left big feet imprints in the forest. What an achievement. I think that
he's
this is,
created a cultural icon.
yeah.
He doesn't lie.
He doesn't lie.
Biodiversity and inclusion.
So you know what? I've said this before. I think that, and it kind of goes along with what Sarah's talking about, and that is that we now know that when you have a tree stump and Joe Biden in an otherwise vacant field, and you ask a question, you do not know where the answer came from. The same thing could easily happen with Kamala Harris. And suddenly you have this Joan of Arc who has emerged, who is recast as the people's candidate. She knows from where she comes, and you should vote for her because she identifies with the downtrodden and the forgotten. Well, wait a second. That's the Republican narrative. But they'll steal it, really, and they'll build her up to where she is absolutely Joan of Arc incarnate, unless the Republicans begin right now to start to put before the American people the issues that they think are the most important. The American people think are the most important. They see what the administration has done to them. They see that they have an invasion of illegal aliens resting in their neighborhoods, not producing anything but violence and crime. They see these things, and that needs to be constantly before the American public if the Republicans are going to stop any sort of a groundswell during the Democratic convention. I hope that Biden drops out and that you see this madness take place. It'll be 1968 all over again, and Republicans will be, cheering from the sidelines, and they should.
I'd like to know how Kamala Harris will answer the first question that would be put to her, it seems, if she is elevated to the presidential slot on the ticket. Yeah, what did you know? When did you know it? When did you know it? And if you didn't know it, how could you not have known it? Is it better that she somehow didn't know, or that she knew and said nothing, did nothing? And given her propensity to laugh at all the wrong times, as some will say, cackle, she has to be extremely careful with how she answers that question. And given her history, I don't know that she's even capable of giving an answer that would satisfy the electorate writ large.
Tim, I think that she will give the same answer that John Kirby gave. Every time I've talked to the President Biden, he has been lucid, straightforward, and decisive.
Then how come he's not running for re-election, Ms. Harris?
Yeah.
Well, it was a choice of either dragging the American public along with his infirmities, COVID, and the constant battle with disease, or let someone younger do it because I said I'd be a transition president, and now I'm honoring that promise.
By the way, Dave's opinion is his own and not that of any Democratic public relations agency.
Well, let me throw in an opinion.
That's a badge of honor.
I think so. I want to switch it up a little bit here, throw a monkey wrench in this discussion, because it's been
great.
Well, as a lawyer, and I'm not trying to, but I mean,
by the way, you don't have to raise your hand.
Supposed to do
We're not in class.
Saying that.
I mean, I called myself a name. Nobody likes a lawyer until they need one. But if I have any legal training, I want to bring it to this panel. And I wrote an article for Liberty Nation News recently about the Trump versus U.S. decision, and it was really addressing the impact of that decision on the numerous legal charges and convictions against Donald Trump, and it really rendered them largely moot. I think it eviscerated the entire lawfare. And while conservatives may have celebrated that, I, as a lawyer, and I haven't written about this, but I was pretty concerned about that case because that case dramatically increased the powers of the presidency of the United States, not just for an incoming Donald Trump, for a currently sitting Joe Biden.
Mm-hmm.
And so imagine had Donald Trump been shot through the skull a couple of weeks ago,
Ouch.
whether
Oh.
Joe Biden would now have the powers to declare martial law because of the unrest that resulted. We would have no elections. There'd be no Kamala problem, except when, if he became infirm, she would take the helm as our new martial law commander in chief. Now, as crazy as this sounds, we have seen that this party would elect a Sasquatch rather than allow a Robert Kennedy or a Bernie to upset their dynasty. How far would they go? And many are raising questions about this assassination attempt. But what I'm saying is that decision still hangs here. This president could still avail himself of a Trump decision that everybody is worried about shielding Trump. It can shield this president. He can call everything he's doing official acts and declare a climate emergency. And we have martial law and maybe a civil war.
This is not a subject I want to start.
Wow. Let's scare everybody.
It's not a subject I want to start delving into right now, but in my opinion, and I think I'm fairly qualified to talk about this as a military veteran and moving in the circles that I move in my private life and knowing the people that I know and what they say. And in fact, my wife has often spoken to me about the possibility of martial law being imposed. And I'm just going to say this one thing, and then I'm not going to talk about this subject anymore. It would be impossible for the US military to impose martial law effectively in this country. It would, they'd never be able to do it, and it would lead to incredibly bad outcomes for whoever happened to be in the White House at that time. That's all I'm going to say.
Well, there's physical martial law, and there's martial law that allows me to suspend Congress and pass all laws and forgive student loans. Whether Americans would stand for it or would be, but anyway, that's why I'm raising the issue. I'm not on some conspiracy theory here. I just think the legal implications of that Trump decision. I don't know that we've fully contemplated how that can work against all of us. I just think the presidency is already too powerful before either of these guys came along.
Well, here's the thing. It could have been a lot worse than it was. He got winged. He got dinged up a little bit. Obviously, there were some system failures with the Secret Service and possibly communication failures with everybody involved in this. And, it's lucky he was standing on the stage last night. So,
amen.
Beyond that, let's look at maybe where he's going now. If he utilize those people that he had, that the RNC trotted out and gave speeches and did their dog and pony show, and it was a good one. Are there potential cabinet picks in that group? And what the hell if? I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that. But what if, if they win, then there's an open Senate seat, and how is that open Senate seat, J.D. Vance, going to be filled? Who fills that? I mean, there's different ways to do that. Mm-hmm. And I'm not an Ohio girl to know that. So
I think that it's pretty clear from the people I talk to that there's a fellow named Mike DeWine in Ohio who is now the governor. He's held like every position within the state government over the years. He's very popular. He's a moderate Republican, and he has his approval rating is really high. And so the thought is that he would be an easy person to just slide into J.D. Vance's slot and make sure that that seat is safe, because, of course, the Republicans beyond the White House have their eyes on enlarging their majority in the House, which is very slim right now.
Right.
And taking the Senate effectively, you could even make a case that they've already taken the Senate if Trump wins, because West Virginia is gone for sure. With Joe Manchin having dropped out, Republicans will take that and assure a 50-50 Senate, in which case a vice president, J.D. Vance, would cast the tie-breaking vote. So there's a lot more at stake, and that's why this is Armageddon for the left. I mean, make no mistake about it. When they're looking at the landscape, the landscape for them politically is not dissimilar to what the World Trade Center looked like after 9/11. I mean, it is the scarred landscape of something that could, and let's face it, there's 3.5 months left in an election cycle that's crazier than anybody could possibly have predicted, even though they predicted it would be a crazy cycle.
In terms of,
yeah, I mean, this is Armageddon for the left because it's very hard for Senate and congressional candidates to explain away an incompetent candidate at the top of the ticket.
Well, the next 6.5 months don't look that great for America with the Biden administration still running things, and it would be. I think, though, that there's another aspect to DeWine may very well say, let's look at this Senate seat. I don't want to be senator for 12 years. So let's look at the future for this Senate seat and put in Vivek Ramaswamy, who said he would consider that and who probably could carry that seat. And there are others, too, that when DeWine was asked about it, said there are plenty of candidates, and I just haven't thought about it yet. I think that was one of the concerns, that I had in our previous panel discussion. Okay, now you've gotten rid of one. You have now two competitions that you have to worry about. But in the meantime, that Senate seat will be filled by the governor.
In terms of cabinet picks, though, and I'm not going to make any predictions about who they're going to be, but I think that Trump's two most anticipated and maybe speculated about cabinet picks, and maybe his two most important cabinet picks, considering the situation currently that we've got in this country, is going to be Attorney General and Director of the Department of Homeland Security. I'm fascinated to see who he would pick to fill those two positions.
I think it's pretty clear that Mike Pompeo will have a prominent role. I'm hearing defense more than state, but it would be one of those two. I think it's pretty clear that Trump has developed a close relationship with Doug Burgum, and that he would, I think in his eyes, make an ideal Secretary of Commerce.
Agreed.
There's certainly going to be room for a Tim Scott if they're willing to pluck him out of his Senate seat, and there's others as well. I mean, there's intriguing questions. For example, would he bring Nikki Haley on again as UN ambassador, for example, or something like that? I mean, because composing a cabinet this time compared to 2017 is like night and day, because he has an established brand. He's governed for 4 years, and he knows everything about everyone now, and he knew nothing about nobody before.
Right. He walked in absolutely not much of a clue about how real government guts work, and that's part of the problem.
That's right, Sarah, and hence you had General Mattis, who was chosen by him originally for the Secretary of Defense. And what happened is it became CENTCOM on the Potomac. And so at least what my recommendation would be is do not choose a former general officer, period, for Secretary of Defense. They come with different skills. Mattis was a magnificent field commander and general officer. I think that he was a fish out of water in the Pentagon. And so that would be
it doesn't make him a good governor. It makes him a good soldier.
Because if you look at it, the people who have been excellent secretaries are those who come with skills of management and organization, and in a civilian world. and that has always been the ones who have done reasonably well. So that would at least be my humble recommendation.
Well, we'll just
I
call him up
think
and tell him what's going
I'm
on there,
I'm
Dave.
going to make one prediction, and that is that I honestly believe that Donald Trump Jr. is going to be in there somewhere. I don't know where, but I have a feeling that somehow he is going to maybe not be I don't know, perhaps a cabinet. I don't think maybe a cabinet position, but I have a feeling that he is going to figure significantly in a new Trump administration, maybe some position in the White House itself. But I think he's going to be in the mix very much.
Well, he's an incredibly effective spokesman. He's a firebrand. He is his father's son in the truest sense of the word. And I think he's going to develop his own political orbit. I actually could not envision him not running for office in the future because of the brand.
I think you're right about
because
that.
of his skills, and he brings a lot of the same things as his father in the sense of his that he is a firebrand and that he is a businessman. He's been running the Trump operation since his father went into politics. So he comes with, in many senses, the same qualifications his father did. And what kind of seat and when, I don't know. On the other hand, he might be so turned off by what his father has had to go through that he would say, as most would,
that name is both a blessing and a curse.
You want me to do this too? After what
I don't know. I almost think that I don't know the guy, but I almost think he might say, no, I relish that. Bring it on. Let's go for it. And of course, now he also has a very politically savvy and connected wife as well.
Right.
So I think that's a future political power couple right there.
Is there any room in this Trump orbit for, a former Democrat turned independent, like a former, or like Senator Sinema, or Tulsi Gabbard? Is there room? Is he going to make room for people like that?
Absolutely.
I would like to see that diversity.
I would like. I don't know about Sinema. I dread the thought of her being anywhere near the government again. But Tulsi Gabbard, yeah, I think I'd kind of quite like to see her in there somewhere. Yeah.
Oh no, I'd like to see him put Robert Kennedy. Yeah, I'd like to see Robert Kennedy in charge of Big Pharma.
I'm sorry to step on you, but I was going to say, you know what, John? The worst thing about it is I stepped on you, and now I can't remember what the hell I was going to say.
I think I stepped on you. I'm really sorry. You were
not wishing to step on anyone.
Now we're just all showing our age.
I think Navarro.
I'm sorry, I just had a Biden moment.
I think Navarro is going to be in there somewhere, and because President Trump will give Navarro a complete pardon, and scrubbing his record, and he was an excellent administrator in the Trump administration before. And
okay, Clark. Oops, go Dave. Finish up. Sorry about that.
And I think that he would be valuable to the country because of his knowledge and his capability to organize and manage.
Well, I would like to go back to Clark's thought process of maybe adding RFK Jr. into a cabinet mixed position. Whether he'd accept it or not would remain to be seen. But what were you saying about that? And Tim can rethink what he was going to say before he got stepped on.
Okay, now I've actually recovered the thought.
Okay.
Incredible.
Who wants to go first, boys?
And that is that. Look, if you had to pick two words about the message beyond the one word Trump that the Republican Party was sending, not Trump in particular, but the Republican Party itself, pick two words, it would be big tent. They're trying to project the big tent. They had what Joy Reid on MSNBC called on Monday their Black Night. They had a bunch of Black speakers. They featured many people of color, different viewpoints, different backgrounds. So the answer to your question, Sarah, I think, is a resounding yes. He wants every Democrat, ex-Democrat, Reform Democrat under that tent. And not only does he want it, but I pretty much guarantee that anyone he could lasso, he's going to put up front as an example of how he's trying to reach across the aisle and be a candidate of unity.
So
Okay, well,
Vance-
back here in the Boondocks, we say lasso, but
Ted
did I miss?
Lasso.
Vance is
this
one of
does
those
not
people.
refer to Ted Lasso, by the way. It's never mind.
hey, Tim.
Yeah, I missed something there. It went woo right through me.
Tim, when you say that, I mean, that would be, the ideal, to have this unity amongst not only Republicans, but also bringing into the tent, as you said, the Democrats. On the other hand, Trump has suffered constantly while in office, from people undercutting him in the administration because they personally did not agree with his policies. You can't have that. You can't have people who are not just intensely loyal to the president. It just doesn't work. In the Pentagon, it was devastating because they left these the crowd people, and it was so difficult to get stuff done. You simply had to ignore them and not use them, push them to the side, never never take them on to important issues. And that's not a good way to run a business or a country.
Are those the people that went into the White House during the transition from Clinton to Bush and pulled the W keys off the typewriters?
Well, no, those were the
holdovers.
Those were the holdovers from the Clinton administration.
Right.
But one of the things that just became stark when I was in the Bush administration was how many people behind closed doors would trash the policies of Rumsfeld and Colin Powell, and they just it was very difficult to deal in a circumstance where you had these reprobates hanging around from the previous administration who did not believe in what Bush was putting forward. So there's it's hard. It's a balancing. You'd like to open the door to people who were good American citizens who also could develop loyalty. I remember Pete Guerin, who was a Democratic congressman from Texas. He was amazing in the Department of Defense.
Well, so
I'm still waiting with bated breath to see what John Clark has to say about about Kennedy, because I know where I'd put Kennedy. So I want to know what you think about it.
Oh, we've got options.
So first of all, I have to confess that I was just trying to be comedically enlightening by throwing him in the mix. But in fact, as Tim has pointed out, what are the parameters? I think there is an issue, whether he'd be willing, whether he could be loyal, because he's not a Trump fan, whether Trump could trust him. But what made me ponder it is that, first of all, it would be an absolute anathema to the Democrats to have Kennedy in any position over Big Pharma. He's a lawyer. He's been very outspoken. I personally would love to see him in charge of the CDC or having oversight there, because I think he'd be very effective. But the broader issue is J.D. Vance already represents that. Come back, prodigal son. And the liberals are, oh, look, he called Trump names and now he's part. Well, maybe Trump won him over. Maybe a lot of other people are being won over, and that's why he is a danger to them. But it needs to be that open tent. And this is the theme that he is saying, I want to unite Americans. So I think it's imperative that he find trustworthy people who are walkaways or former enemies, so he can show that solidarity so that all Americans can feel welcome at that table.
I think Brandon Straka from Walkaway needs to be the press secretary. Just my thoughts.
I'm just going to throw in. I'm going to throw in 6 letters here: JFK, FDA.
Great.
RFK, FDA.
RFK. There's too many. There's always been too many Kennedys.
Can you imagine the meltdown that would happen in Washington if Robert F. Kennedy Jr. got anywhere near the domain of Anthony Fauci? I just can't even imagine the drama. I would
love to see that.
But there's something in all of this. I just wanted to drop this in before we part ways temporarily here. You know, all these years, the left has been saying that Trump is everything bad, all the way up to the point of being a Nazi dictator, right? They've said he's a threat to the nation. He's a threat to democracy. He's a threat to everything we hold dear. He's the most dangerous man that has ever come onto the scene. And he must be stopped at all costs. And they've shown how far they're willing to go to stop him. Then he gets shot in the head. And Joe Biden gets out there and say, I've called Donald and expressed, my concern. So my question is, if Joseph Stalin is shot in the head, are we supposed to call him to express our condolences? Are we supposed to call a terrorist and say, sorry, call his family and say, we're sorry we had to kill him? What do you do when someone you have depicted as the face of evil is practically cut down by an assassin's bullet? Well, what you do is what they did. And it showed exactly how disingenuous they've been the entire time in trying to depict this man as the face of evil.
No, it's a fantastic point, Tim. It's a fantastic point because they've so often. How often have we heard one of the many criticisms they have of Donald Trump is that he, kind of like cozies up to dictators. Well, Joe Biden calling him and wishing him well after he got shot was, well, aren't you cozying up to a dictator then? Yeah. No, it's a great point, Tim. Very good.
Well, guys, I think that's a great note to end on here. As always, a good discussion and a lot of good information for our listeners and our readers. But that's it for our live GOP Convention Conservative 5 panel today. Check out our other C5 shows and segments on your favorite video platform, YouTube, Vimeo, Rumble. We're on them all. As well, Liberty Nation News has its own Roku channel where you can see all of our television productions. I'm your host, Sarah Cowgill. Thanks for joining us today. For free thinking, free speech, libertynation.com.